221. Hiote. Unable to escape, time moved slowly. In Shrek City, at the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce headquarters, a simply furnished room held the Ice Empress as she lay restlessly on a large, soft bed. She had long since changed out of her signature white and green gown, and now wore only a loose white short-sleeved t-shirt. The fabric was soft and slightly oversized, which only made her look smaller. On her legs, she wore a pair of white pantyhose that clung to every slender curve from toes to waist, her usual casual attire when she was alone. Though she loved her exquisite dress, simple clothes like these were far more comfortable for daily life. Yet comfort did not soothe her now. Zhang Lexuan's words from before she left kept replaying in her head, and in the quiet room, those suppressed memories rose up unbidden. She remembered how she had stubbornly resisted him at first, and then been left speechless time and again. The faint, almost electric sensation that had lingered on her lips returned with vivid clarity, especially now. The sound of trickling water came from a corner of the room, the bathroom. Her heart tightened. There was someone bathing in there. Her gaze drifted toward the door and snapped back as soon as it landed. The thought of him bathing made her head swim, and a strange warmth spread through her. She could have cleaned her clothes and body with a breath of spirit power, effortless and convenient, but he had insisted on taking a normal bath, even saying something like, "So you won't find it unpalatable later." What did he mean by that? The Ice Empress told herself he must have an ulterior motive. He was clearly planning to bully her next. Images raced through her mind. She pursed her lips and drew her stockinged legs together, losing the mood to read stories on the Lingshu network. What was she doing? She had hated him at first for taking the Snow Empress away, angry, wronged, convinced he was no good. But somewhere along the way, everything had shifted. Seeing him with the Snow Empress stirred feelings she couldn't name. Over time, those feelings grew into a constant, awkward pull she hadn't noticed until it was too late. The last time he had embraced her in public, something in her had throbbed differently, and then she had run away. From that moment, she'd tried to correct herself through cultivation, trying to drive those distracting thoughts from her. Her cultivation cycle had barely finished when he had caught her, and she'd been bullied, teamed up on, by him and the Snow Empress. And just now, he had kissed her several times without warning. The memory of that near resistance, what she had called resistance, left her hopelessly flustered. From the romance novels she knew, kissing was only the beginning. She was painfully aware of what could come after, having seen it before. Would she end up like the Snow Empress had been then? Or worse? Her pulse quickened and her cheeks burned. She shook her head hard as if to clear it, but the images clung to her like maggots, too clear, too panicking. She hesitated and looked toward the window. A quiet urge to flee rose in her chest. Not because she didn't want to be near him, exactly the opposite, but out of a strange, nameless fear. Should she run? Once the thought appeared, it spread like weeds. Carefully, she pushed herself up. Her delicate feet in white stockings touched the soft carpet. She held her breath like a small animal preparing to slip away from a hunter, tiptoeing toward escape. "Where are you going?" The voice came from behind, familiar and clear. Her body froze. The sound of water stopped, as if someone had shut it off. Footsteps sounded behind her, and an all-too-familiar presence moved in close. She opened her mouth to say something, an excuse, a lie. But before she could speak, a hand, carrying the warm, moist scent of a bath, slipped under the hem of her t-shirt. The warm palm, still cool with water, settled precisely over her flat, soft lower abdomen. The contact made her tremble. Then the arm tightened and pulled her back into a close embrace. She was held firmly. "So, where exactly are you trying to go?" Warm breath brushed her ear. His voice held a slight note of confusion and something else she couldn't name. Instinctively, she pressed both hands against the hand on her stomach, trying to push it away, but found herself oddly weak. Her limbs went limp. Why did she feel this way? Why did she go soft at his touch? Had he drugged her? The thought rose in her mind, sharp and indignant, but she kept it to herself. She forced her voice to stay steady and said, "Nowhere." Kong Ming'an hummed softly and then, as if shifting subjects, said, "Then come here. It's time to discuss something serious." Before she could make sense of what he meant by serious, his arm around her waist tightened. An irresistible force drew her back. Only a few steps from where she'd tried to flee, she found herself exactly where she had started. For a moment, she fell silent. It was dawning on her that there was nowhere for her to run. Ming'an sat on the edge of the bed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, drew the Ice Empress into his arms and let her straddle his lap sideways. For someone as small as she was, that position closed off every obvious escape route. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it made her feel strange all over. The pleasant scent of his body, like pure spirit energy, lingered at her nose. His steady voice hovered near her ear, his warm, solid chest pressed against her back, and his hand rested at her waist, blocking any attempt to slip away. A thin layer of cloth separated them, yet the contact was too clear to ignore. Oddly, in that utterly controlled posture, a curious sense of safety grew in her chest, and even the thought crossed her mind. It wouldn't be so bad to stay like this forever. Tsk, how weird. Are you listening to me? His voice came again, close to her ear. The hand at her waist shifted slightly. The cloth rubbed and tickled. The Ice Empress snapped back to attention, hesitated, then answered quickly. I was listening. Then tell me what I just said. She went silent, eyes drifting away, guilt written across her face. Ming'an sighed, reached up and pinched both her soft cheeks, pulling them left and right. The Ice Empress let out a muffled protest, more like an affronted, helpless sound than real resistance, as if fate itself had grabbed her by the scruff of the neck. After a moment, he released her. She snorted in displeasure, but he tightened his embrace instead, and with the pad of a finger, tapped lightly at the soft spot between her waist and abdomen. Her complaints ceased immediately. Her body tensed. She turned her head and glared at him, jaw clenched. I'll keep talking. Listen properly. Understood? He said, increasing the pressure a touch. She had been about to snarl in reply, but could not hold out. She answered in a low, constrained voice. I know. Good. He let go. Her muscles relaxed, and she leaned back against his chest, golden eyes briefly clouded. She felt slightly dazed and couldn't help asking herself why he seemed to know her body better than she did. Ming'an settled and calmly explained. According to the usual method of cultivating a star ring, after you successfully condense one ring, there are two conditions you have to meet before you can advance again. He continued. First, an adaptation period. Your spirit power, your physique, even the star ring itself must undergo a qualitative change and stabilize at the new level. The entire spell cultivator system shifts during that process. Second, you must accumulate a vast reserve of spirit power, an energy pool large enough to support condensation of the next star ring. Only when both conditions are met at the same time can you advance smoothly. The Ice Empress, who had already recovered some of her composure, listened. She wasn't ignorant where cultivation was concerned. After all, her last three-way session between the Snow Empress and Ming'an had left her in precisely this accumulating phase. She needed to use her star ring to refine her lower-grade spirit power into the higher-grade energy she required, and her body had to transform along with the buildup. That was the slowest part. Right now, she could typically refine 3 to 4 standard spirit cores into usable reserves each day. Neither impressive nor abysmal, merely average. Ming'an went on. Energy supply isn't your problem yet. You haven't reached divine rank, so ordinary standard spirit cores will do. And even if you reach divine rank, my divine kingdom of order will give you access. Energy won't be an issue. What keeps you from advancing faster is the slow efficiency of transforming and accumulating energy. The Ice Empress raised her head. So how do we fix that? He smiled and said 2 words, dual cultivation. She stiffened. You pervert, you just want to take advantage of me, she thought, glaring at him, then looked away and said nothing. He pinched her cheek in exasperation. What are you thinking? True dual cultivation is a serious cultivation method, he said. What I'm proposing relies on the energy offset and fusion model of the ice and fire yin-yang wells, the idea of yin-yang complementary dual spirit cores, and the experiments I've done with simulated energy. In short, it uses opposing attributes of spirit power to stimulate each other and increase transformation efficiency. For example, you carry extreme ice energy. If you combine with a sufficiently powerful, pure fire attribute spirit power as a catalyst and operate the method together, Your transformation process will speed up significantly." Her eyes lit. It sounded like a shortcut. She leaned closer and spoke earnestly. "Teach me." He only smiled and nodded. She felt it then, a scorching, vast, pure fire attribute spirit power rising beside her. It was coming from him. Wait, that can't be. This isn't a serious dual cultivation. Before she could fully register the implications, he shifted. One hand pressed gently, then firmly on her shoulder and pushed her. She pitched back onto the soft bedding. Her body froze. Breath caught in her throat. She stared at the figure looming over her. A premonition made her golden eyes tremble. You said serious dual cultivation wasn't like this," she stammered. Ming'an tilted his head, face composed and almost solemn. "I never said my dual cultivation was serious." "No, you lied, Mf." Her protest barely began before a cool, soft pressure sealed her mouth. The word dissolved into an indistinct whimper. The lights in the room went quietly dark. In the blackness, the only sound was the low, lingering whisper of someone stubbornly holding on. 223. "We'll talk about it later," the proud and aloof Jiao. Day after day, night after night. Several days later, in a room at the Shrek City headquarters of the Ming'an Chamber of Commerce, the light inside was dim. Heavy curtains blocked the morning sun. The room was slightly messy and carried a lazy, languid air. Pillows that should have been on the sofa lay scattered across the carpet, which was crumpled and shoved into one corner. In another corner, a few barely intact garments and strips of lace were heaped together like strange scraps of fabric. Only the large bed in the center, though the sheets were wrinkled, had retained its general shape. For a moment, a sliver of sunlight slipped through the curtains like fine golden dust and landed on the slightly raised quilt, tracing the petite curves of the girl hidden beneath. The warmth stirred her. She let out a small, unconscious whimper, and her long lashes fluttered. Her consciousness returned in a haze. Instinctively, the Ice Empress opened her eyes a little, but her vision was blurred and her head felt stuffed with cotton. Dizziness and an overwhelming fatigue washed over her, leaving her too weak even to move a finger. Wait, what was happening? Something felt wrong. She reached out, trying to piece things together, and memories came back in jagged flashes. "Oh, right. I remember now. I was drilled." "Wait, drilled?" The Ice Empress snapped fully awake and reached blindly to her side. Her hand met only the cold, empty sheet and a faint, familiar scent. Where was he? Panic rose up, making her chest tight and sending a wave of discomfort through her body. She ignored the soreness and hauled the quilt off. In the thin light through the curtain gap, she sat up exposed to the cool air, eyes scanning the empty space beside her and then the rest of the room. No one else was there. Her pupils trembled. She forced her aching limbs to push her out of bed, but the moment her feet hit the floor, her legs went rubbery. Damn it, couldn't he have been gentler? She thought, swallowing hard. She braced herself and tried again, determined to get up when a familiar ripple appeared by the bed. A figure stepped out of it as casually as if he had walked through a doorway, carrying a paper bag. As soon as he saw her, his expression showed a flicker of surprise. "You're awake?" Ming'an said. He had expected she would sleep longer. The Ice Empress lunged forward and crashed into his arms. Ming'an blinked at the sudden, desperate hug. She clung to his waist as if terrified he might leave. His face softened. He slid his arms around her back and stroked her gently. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice low and soft. She didn't answer, burying her face in his chest and shaking her head stubbornly, holding him even tighter. He didn't press. He kept rubbing the top of her hair, holding her quiet and close. After a while, her breathing evened out and she calmed a bit. Still clinging to him, she mumbled against his shirt, a faint note of grievance in her voice. "Where did you run off to?" Ming'an steadied her at the waist and explained in a gentle tone, "You said you were hungry before you fell asleep and wanted some proper food, so I went out to buy something." He shook the paper bag. The smell of warm food drifted out. The Ice Empress saw the buns inside and remembered. Right, she had told him she was hungry because she was too stubborn to beg. He'd teased her, saying, "We'll talk about it later," and refused to give her a moment's peace. Thinking of that made her bristle. She cursed under her breath in a slightly nasal tone. "Bastard!" Her voice was low, almost like a reward rather than an accusation. "Kinda am," Kong Ming'an replied, smiling. His coaxing tone made the Ice Empress want to bite him. Before she could respond, he draped a wide coat over her shoulders. It carried warmth and his familiar scent. She froze, realizing she must have hugged him without clothes on. For a second, her ears flushed. Then she took hold of the coat, buttoned it up, and convinced herself that it wasn't a big deal. She hadn't been wearing much over the past few days anyway, and he'd already seen plenty. After a moment, she calmed. She lifted her head and her golden eyes met his. Then she hugged him again, tighter than before. Kong Ming'an looked slightly taken aback, but only rubbed her hair and asked softly, "Still not right?" She pressed her face into his chest and nuzzled him, muttering so only he could hear, "I'm so tired. Let me hold you a little longer." Surprise flashed across his features. Was this the soft side of a tsundere? Without resisting, he stood quietly, one hand steadying her waist, letting her use him like a body pillow. This was actually kind of nice. A moment later, on the sofa in the room, the Snow Empress was curled up in Kong Ming'an's arms. She wore nothing but his oversized coat. Compared to her own clothes, his coat came down just above her knees. It looked bulky on her slight frame, but it did nothing to hide her beauty. Her delicate, doll-like face was flawless. The too large coat only made her seem even smaller, somehow more helpless and cute. Beneath the hem, a pair of bare, pale legs hung naturally, swaying slightly with her movements, dazzling in the morning light. She wasn't wearing anything under the coat. Not because she wanted to be indecent, but simply because she had almost no clothes left. The few garments she had, especially her stockings, had been torn to rags and tossed into a corner. For now, she had no choice but to wear this man's coat. The Snow Empress told herself this was perfectly reasonable, and even found herself thinking it wasn't bad at all. She picked at a steamed bun as she lay there. It had a thin skin, generous filling, and rich soup inside. Even though her current cultivation meant she no longer relied on food for energy, after several days of barely eating, a real meal felt good. When she finished the last bun, she looked up at Kong Ming'an, whose hands were resting naturally around her waist. She leaned back against his chest and asked softly, "How am I doing?" Kong Ming'an slowly opened his eyes. A silver glow flashed in them, and then was gone. He gave a slight, satisfied sigh. "Your body is in very good condition. The cultivation effect is even better than I expected." The Snow Empress puckered her lips and made a faint sound of annoyance. "Is that what you call cultivation? I don't know if you actually want to help me improve, or you're just looking for excuses to bully me." Kong Ming'an kept his face calm. "Tell me plainly, was the efficiency high or not?" She wanted to snap back, to insist she wasn't simply being toyed with. She still felt sore and weak in places, even after resting, and had no desire to move. Why did she always act like everything was fine after each session? Was this the difference between people? But when she thought about the results, there was no denying it. The dual cultivation had been astonishingly effective. Before, she could at most refine 3 or 4 spirit power cores a day. During the dual cultivation sessions, every time she was bullied, she could swallow and assimilate one core smoothly, another would be put into her mouth, and the cycle would continue. Even when she blacked out in the middle of a session, on waking, she could clearly feel her spirit power accumulating and her transformation progressing. The cores had been absorbed. Over the past few days, with only brief interruptions, the process had hardly stopped. She couldn't remember exactly how many cores she'd taken. She only remembered obeying him without thinking. "Open your mouth," and she did. He told her to do something, and she complied. From the results, it was cultivation, and the speed was ridiculously high. Aside from the exhaustion afterward, there seemed to be no downside. She realized, belatedly, why Zhang Lexuan had said, "If you can't endure it, call me anytime." It might not have been a taunt. It could have been a warning from someone who'd been through the same thing. "All in all," she said slowly, "the dual cultivation method worked. No major problems." Kong Ming'an sounded satisfied. "This is only the first version. With experience, we can refine it. Eventually, we could build a universal dual cultivation technique and push the speed even higher." The Snow Empress narrowed her eyes and said, half in jest, half in suspicion, "You just want an excuse to bully me." Kong Ming'an smiled faintly. "It's not bullying. he said seriously. The core idea here is to artificially create an energy clash between two opposing attributes, yours and mine. By simulating and controlling a high-intensity interaction, we accelerate the refinement of spirit power and the efficiency of life-level transformation. For traits like ours, which are highly complementary, if I can precisely shape and stabilize the clash, the method is feasible, and right now it's the most effective approach we know. But it isn't universal, he continued. Not everyone can stay rational and precisely control the energy flow throughout the whole process to keep the model stable. He glanced down at the Snow Empress's face, and just as she started to say something sharp, he reached out and pinched her soft cheek to stop her. What were you thinking? She had been about to finish with, you wouldn't be thinking of, ugh, but the interruption left her blinking. He kept his tone calm as he explained another idea. Theoretically, this model doesn't have to be limited to two people. You could rely on external objects to construct a more general cultivation method. The Snow Empress's eyes widened. For a moment, she felt both surprised and wary, but Kong Ming'an's next comment made her freeze. For example, it's very hard for you to keep self-control in that state. You wouldn't be thinking about cultivation at all. She tried to argue, tried to recall the last few days to prove him wrong, but much of that time was a blur. Her memories were fuzzy and broken. She would briefly wake, her voice weak and pleading or cursing, and then a spirit power core would be shoved into her mouth. Her consciousness would be swept away by the tide of sensations. Her body would drift, and she'd black out again. Then she'd wake, beg or cry, have another core fed to her, sink once more. The cycle repeated over and over until she couldn't say where one session ended and the next began. He was right. For the past few days, she'd been dazed and limp. How could she have been expected to think about cultivation techniques or energy models then? 225. Kong Ming'an. I am the best dual cultivation vessel. The Ice Empress fell silent. By her own admission, she wasn't cut out for dual cultivation. She was more suited to lying back and being cultivated than actively participating. Damn it, why did she feel such a stubborn resistance? She ground her teeth. Kong Ming'an's expression stayed calm as he continued to outline his idea. To make this method widely usable, he explained, we have to start from a basic, safer approach. Right now, when two people cultivate together, they influence each other and face many limitations. So we could instead use a specialized spirit tool as the energy source to create a stable energy counterbalance with the spirit master's own body. For example, a light attribute spirit master could be equipped with a spirit tool that reliably outputs dark spirit power. By forming a controllable energy conflict field between the tool and their own light power, you can still accelerate cultivation. Strictly speaking, that wouldn't be traditional dual cultivation. It's more like an advanced cultivation aid, but the technical path is feasible and the results shouldn't be bad. The Ice Empress couldn't help interrupting. If it's that simple, why didn't you do it that way? If it could be arranged this way, she thought, she wouldn't end up being knocked out every time. A few times was bearable, but too many, and she'd feel broken. Kong Ming'an shook his head and refuted her calmly. 2 reasons. First, this spirit tool plan is only just a concept. I have a rough theoretical framework and a research direction, but no complete data for a spiritual pivot to run preliminary derivations, let alone a finished product, so there's no option at the moment. Second, he paused, then tapped the Ice Empress playfully on the head. Do you really think an ordinary spirit tool can control energy more precisely than I can? Even if I split off just a sliver of consciousness to guide one, the precision, flexibility, and stability would far surpass what spirit tools can do. It might sound odd, but at this stage, I'm probably the best dual cultivation furnace there is. Otherwise, why do you think your cultivation efficiency has improved so quickly lately? As he spoke, he tightened his arm and pulled her closer, whispering in her ear. Besides, you rather enjoy this sort of cultivation too, don't you? She closed her mouth and went silent for a moment. His words dredged up the memories he'd carefully guided into her mind, how his fiery spirit power moved through her in a different way than ordinary circulation, flowing from bottom to top, reaching into every limb and bone. It was like soaking in a hot spring, warm and enveloping, yet with a peculiar sense of movement, as if each cell were being gently washed and nourished. After she had stubbornly demanded, "Is that all?" and provoked him at the start, she had been taught a harsh lesson. Her consciousness had drifted between clarity and haze. She had shouted shameful things, been put into embarrassing positions. All in all, aside from being exhausted, the whole process had been rather pleasant, perhaps even a little addictive. Her throat bobbed, her body softened, a private sensation rose again, and she stopped swinging her legs. Instinct made her tense and press down with one hand to suppress it. She was only wearing one outer robe. If she lost control and dirtied it, he would laugh at her forever. Absolutely not. She took shallow breaths to steady herself. Kong Ming'an didn't hurry. He held her quietly, idly stroking her hair, his eyes catching a blend of silver and pale blue light as if he were deep in thought. For a long while, the room was silent. The Ice Empress forced herself back to normal. The first time always left a lingering trace, and she truly had trouble resisting it. She had no idea how the Snow Empress managed to remain composed. Maybe she should ask her later. For now, at least, she could think straight. She shifted her gaze and changed the subject. "What exactly is your relationship with Zhang Lexuan?" she asked. Kong Ming'an paused, the light in his eyes fading. He chose his words slowly. "It's probably similar to what you and I have now." The Ice Empress clicked her tongue in displeasure. Of course, this man wasn't straightforward. "Does the Snow Empress know?" "She knows." "The Snow Empress knows?" The Ice Empress blinked and frowned. "And Juzi?" "No." Kongin shook his head, answering quickly. "Juzi and I are only in a purely superior subordinate relationship." She let out a relieved breath and nodded, then caught on to a single word in his reply and pressed, "Currently?" Kong Ming'an looked to the side for a moment, then met her eyes and said, "Apart from the Snow Empress and Sister Lexuan, it's just you right now. There is no one else currently." She stared at him, picking the word apart. "Currently?" He fell silent, then finally admitted, "Currently." She felt the color drain from her face, metaphorically. She didn't have much choice in hair color at the moment anyway. After some patient coaxing, the scorpion within her quieted a bit. She glanced at Kong Ming'an beside her and pursed her lips. She couldn't stay mad. This had been her choice, and she didn't regret it. "So what do we do next?" She shifted the subject with practiced ease and, in the same motion, crossed her arms, tensing and curling up as she narrowed her eyes. "Are you coming again?"